21 nights, same time, same position, same 3 breaths. And somewhere around night 11, I stopped feeling like I was the one initiating it. That's the part I wasn't expecting. I went into this as an experiment, the kind of thing you try because the idea is strange enough to be interesting and ancient enough to feel like it might actually matter. Thoth's 3-breath sequence, a breathing practice traced back to Hermetic tradition, tied to one of the most enigmatic figures in the entire esoteric record. A deity, a scribe, a cosmic architect, depending on which layer of the tradition you're reading. I wasn't looking for a spiritual experience. I was looking for data, personal data, the kind you can only collect by doing the thing yourself. What I got was harder to categorize. Over the next several minutes, I'm going to walk you through what this practice actually is, where it comes from, what the Hermetic texts say it's supposed to do, and what happened when I actually committed to it for 3 weeks straight. Not filtered through belief, not dressed up in reverence I didn't earn. Just the sequence, the tradition behind it, and the honest account of what showed up. If you've been circling this kind of material, curious but skeptical, drawn in but not quite willing to take it seriously, this one's for you. Before you can understand why anyone would structure a breathing practice around Thoth's name, you have to understand what Thoth actually represented in the ancient world. And that means going deeper than the ibis-headed figure most people recognize from Egyptian iconography. Thoth wasn't simply a god of writing. That's the shorthand version, the one that makes it into general history books. The fuller picture is considerably stranger and considerably more interesting. In Egyptian cosmological thinking, Thoth was the principle by which reality could be named, recorded, and therefore stabilized. He was the divine scribe who recorded the outcome of the judgment of souls in the Hall of Ma'at. He was the keeper of cosmic time, credited with inventing the calendar, with maintaining the boundary between ordered existence and the chaos that existed before creation. Some texts describe him as self-created, without mother or father, which is a theological statement you don't make about minor figures. But the layer that matters most for our purposes is the Hermetic layer, the tradition that emerged from the fusion of Egyptian theological thought with Greek philosophical frameworks somewhere in the early centuries of the Common Era. In that tradition, Thoth was identified with the Greek god Hermes, and the combined figure, Hermes Trismegistus, meaning Hermes the thrice great, became the supposed author of a vast body of sacred texts collectively known as the Corpus Hermeticum. Thrice great. That phrase alone is worth sitting with. The triple designation wasn't decorative. It encoded a claim about mastery across 3 domains: the material world, the celestial world, and the divine. A figure who understood all 3 levels of reality simultaneously was not a god in the ordinary mythological sense. He was a principle, a living key to how the universe was structured. The Hermetic texts that carry his name deal with cosmology, the nature of the soul, the mechanics of divine mind, and the path by which human consciousness might ascend towards something like reunion with its source. These aren't folk magic texts. They're philosophical and theological documents of remarkable sophistication, and they influenced everyone from Renaissance scholars to alchemists to the founders of Western ceremonial magic. Now, breath. Why breath? Because in Hermetic thought, breath was never simply a biological function. It was the primary interface between the physical body and the subtle dimensions of existence. The Egyptian word for breath and the word for soul were deeply intertwined. The Greek concept of pneuma, literally breath or wind, was used to describe the animating force that connected matter to divine mind. In this framework, controlled breathing wasn't relaxation technique. It was a precision instrument, a way of tuning the instrument of the body to frequencies it couldn't access through ordinary waking function. Thoth, as the deity most associated with the hidden mechanics of cosmic order, was the natural patron of this kind of practice. Not because someone invented that association arbitrarily, but because the logic of the tradition demanded it. If you wanted to use breath to move between levels of reality, you were operating in Thoth's domain. You were working with the tools of the scribe who recorded the structure of everything. That's the tradition I was stepping into. I want to be clear-eyed about that. I'm not claiming it's literally true in every detail, but I am saying that the internal logic is coherent, the lineage is ancient, and the people who developed these frameworks were not operating naively. They were doing what the best thinkers of any era do, constructing models of reality that could be tested through direct experience. The three-breath sequence is one of those models made practical. Let me describe the actual practice, what it involves, how it's structured, and what the traditional sources say each element is meant to accomplish. The three-breath sequence, as it appears in Hermetic-adjacent traditions, isn't a single monolithic protocol with a single canonical source. Like most genuine esoteric practices, it exists across multiple texts and lineages in slightly different forms, with a consistent underlying architecture. What I'm describing here draws from that consensus structure, the elements that show up repeatedly enough to be considered foundational. The sequence is performed at the threshold of sleep. That timing is deliberate and important. The hypnagogic state, the transitional zone between waking consciousness and sleep, is one of the most documented altered states in both ancient spiritual literature and modern neuroscience. Ancient practitioners didn't have our vocabulary for it, but they clearly knew it existed, and they understood it as a doorway. The threshold where the filters of ordinary waking consciousness become permeable. Thoth's sequence was designed to be performed exactly at that threshold, not before it and not after. The practitioner is meant to have already settled the body, lying down, eyes closed, physical tension released. Not meditating in the active sense, waiting at the edge. The first breath is an inhalation that is slow enough to feel deliberate, but not so extended that it requires muscular effort. The traditional description emphasizes naturalness. The breath should feel like something the body wants to do, simply guided into greater depth and intentionality. As you inhale, the attention is directed inward, specifically toward the center of the chest. Not the lungs as a mechanical system, but the energetic center. Before we continue, there's something I want to place in your hands. We've gathered 12 years of Hermetic source material, the Corpus Hermeticum, the Emerald Tablets, and more, stripped of fear bait and rebuilt as a working initiatory sequence into a single 3-volume library for those who feel the pull towards something deeper. Because whether we speak of clearing the field of what was never yours, architecting reality through the 7 Hermetic laws as machinery, or building an auric field with weight that walks into a room ahead of you, one truth remains. Understanding without sequence leaves the ground unowned and nothing moves. This is for anyone who's ready to work the initiation in the order it was always meant to be worked. You'll find it in the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code right here. I'll give you a moment to do that. The Hermetic tradition associates with the seat of nous, the divine intellect that distinguishes human consciousness from purely animal existence. The held pause after the first inhale is where the work begins. Not a strain hold, not breath retention in the athletic sense, a settled suspension. And during that suspension, you are meant to silently speak the name, not out loud, not even as subvocalization, as what the texts describe as interior speech, the kind of thinking that doesn't use the tongue or the throat, but still has a quality of sound, of vibration, of address. Thoth. 3 times. Interior, resonant, intentional. The exhalation of the first breath is a release, not a collapse, but a conscious letting go, understood in the tradition as offering the breath outward, returning something to the larger field from which it came. The second breath deepens the process. Where the first breath establishes contact, marks the space, signals intention, The second breath is about receptivity. The inhale is slightly slower, the pause is extended, and during this suspension, the instruction is to listen. Not for a specific sound, not for a voice in the way we ordinarily understand voices, but for the quality of interior space after the name has been spoken. Is it still? Is it different from how it was a moment ago? Is there any sense of response? I want to be careful here because this is where the practice either opens up or where skepticism is likely to close it down. The traditional framework says you are not imagining a response. You are creating the conditions under which something already present can become perceptible. The distinction matters enormously to the tradition, even if it's not immediately accessible to a modern reader. The third breath is the integration breath. It's the fullest of the three, the deepest inhalation, the longest natural pause, and an exhalation that is deliberately extended, sometimes described as twice the length of the inhale. This is the breath that is meant to carry whatever has been received in the second phase back into the body, back into the tissues and the nervous system, anchoring the contact into the physical. After the third exhalation, you simply allow sleep to come. You don't analyze. You don't try to hold the experience in waking attention. The instruction is trust. Trust that whatever the sequence has initiated will continue to work while the conscious mind releases its grip. I'm Daniel, and this is Hermetic Talk, and I want to say something honest here. I personally think this is the most underrated aspect of the entire practice. Not the breathing mechanics, not the name repetition, but that final instruction. The surrender into sleep as a deliberate act of trust. Most spiritual practices ask you to remain alert. This one asks you to let go at the exact moment of activation. That inversion is, I think, the heart of what makes it genuinely hermetic, rather than simply a meditation technique with ancient branding. The tradition says Thoth operates in the spaces the waking mind can't occupy, so the waking mind has to vacate. I want to tell you what the first week actually looked like. Not the version where everything is mysteriously atmospheric from night one, but the real version, which was considerably more mundane and considerably more instructive. Night one was technical. I'd spent time earlier that day reviewing the practice, reading through the source material, making sure I had the sequence clear in my mind. I lay down around 11, went through my usual wind down, and when I felt the first genuine edge of drowsiness, I began. The first breath felt mechanical. That's not a criticism, it was appropriate. I was learning a new physical and attentional pattern, and the body doesn't integrate new patterns gracefully on the first attempt. I was thinking about the sequence more than doing it, monitoring myself, checking whether I was doing it right, which, as anyone who has tried any contemplative practice knows, is precisely the kind of interference that makes the practice less effective. The interior repetition of the name Thoth 3 times, in that suspended pause after the inhale, felt strange in the way that any deeply unfamiliar thing feels strange. Not bad strange, just foreign. Like saying a word in a language you've only read and never spoken aloud, and hearing how different it sounds from how you'd imagined it. I fell asleep before the third breath on night 2. I'm not sure if that counts as success or failure. The body, when you stop fighting it and start breathing with genuine depth and intention, apparently decides it's ready for sleep faster than your schedule anticipated. By night 4, something had shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. The sequence was starting to feel less like a procedure I was executing and more like a doorway I was learning to find in the dark. I'd spent a couple of evenings earlier in the week going back through some of my older research notes. I have folders of material from years of working on this channel, and I pulled out everything I had on Hermetic cosmology, specifically the sections dealing with pneuma and the relationship between breath and divine intellect. Reading that material in preparation, rather than as abstract study, changed how I approached the practice on night 4. I wasn't just doing the sequence, I understood what it was claiming to do. And understanding the claim, even without fully believing it, changed the quality of attention I brought to it. That's something I'd encourage anyone to consider before dismissing as too intellectual. The Hermetic tradition was never designed for practitioners who left their minds at the door. It was specifically designed for people who could hold both rigorous thinking and direct experience simultaneously. The sequence is richer when you know what it's reaching for. Nights 5 and 6 were the most resistance-heavy of the entire 3 weeks. Not emotional resistance, practical resistance. Life was loud those days. Work ran long. My mind kept circling back to unresolved logistics the moment I tried to settle. This is, I suspect, not unique to me. It's what happens when you try to introduce a threshold practice into an ordinary life that hasn't made particular space for threshold experiences. The edge of sleep, which should be the most naturally available liminal moment in any human day, becomes almost inaccessible when the nervous system is still metabolizing the noise of waking hours. What I discovered on night 6, by accident, genuinely, was that the sequence itself was the solution to this problem. Not performing the sequence from a place of calm, but using the sequence to create the calm. Allowing the first breath to be an acknowledgement of all the mental noise rather than an attempt to silence it. Breathing into the chaos, not past it. The name spoken interior, Thoth, 3 times, not as an escape route, but as a center of gravity. Something to orient around while everything else was still swirling. Night 7, I dreamed about water. I don't typically remember my dreams with any clarity. That's just how my sleep has always worked. The water dream was vivid enough that I woke briefly and held the image consciously for a moment before it dissolved. A dark body of water. A sense of something large just below the surface. Not threatening, attentive. I wrote it down. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I wrote it down. By day 10, something had quietly reorganized itself. Not dramatically. That's the thing nobody tells you about practices like this. The changes don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with a timestamp. You look back at your notes from 3 days prior and realize that the person who wrote those words was operating in a slightly different register than the person reading them now. The shift had happened somewhere in the middle, invisible while it was occurring. What I noticed first was timing. Not the breath timing. I had that fairly locked by the end of the first week. I mean the timing of when my mind went quiet. Before the practice, that threshold, the moment between active thought and something closer to stillness, it was unpredictable. Some nights it came fast. Most nights it didn't come at all, or not until I was already half asleep and couldn't use it. After day 10, it started arriving more consistently and earlier, like a door that had always been there but required a specific combination to open. And I had finally stopped trying to force it and started learning the sequence. The 3-breath sequence, for anyone just arriving to this, the structure is deceptively simple. A long inhale, measured, deliberate, drawn in through the nose in a way that fills the lower lungs first, then the chest. A hold that Hermetic texts describe not as breath retention, but as a moment of suspension. The breath received, but not yet integrated, hovering between worlds. And then the exhale, which in the traditional framing is described as the breath of release, not emptying, but offering. What you took in, you give back, transformed. 3 rounds. Each one said to correspond to a different plane of the Hermetic threefold cosmos: the material, the intermediary, and the divine. I want to be honest about how I approached that framework going into this. I'm Daniel, and this is Hermetic Talk. And if you've been around this channel long enough, you know I tend to hold these conceptual architectures with a kind of respectful skepticism. I don't come in wanting to believe. I come in wanting to understand. The cosmological framing of the 3-breath sequence, the idea that each breath cycle corresponds to a distinct ontological layer, that wasn't something I had committed to as literal truth. I approached it as a functional metaphor, a map that might or might not correspond to actual territory. What changed around day 10 was that the map started feeling less like a metaphor and more like a description. That's uncomfortable to write. I'm aware of how it sounds, but I said at the start of this that I was going to document what actually happened, not a sanitized version of it that fits more neatly into rational categories. And what actually happened was this. The 3 breaths stopped feeling like 3 identical repetitions of the same action. They started feeling distinct, qualitatively different from one another. The first breath felt grounded, there's no better word for it. Heavy in a good way, like making contact with something solid. The second felt suspended, genuinely, in a way that was hard to locate physically. And the third, the exhale as offering, started producing a sensation I can only describe as a kind of interior spaciousness, like a room that had been crowded suddenly having some of the furniture removed. Before we continue, some of what I've learned simply never makes it onto YouTube. That's why we have Insights Academy, a free newsletter where I go deeper into hidden knowledge, ancient wisdom, metaphysics, and the nature of consciousness. The knowledge we don't share in these videos. And when you sign up, you'll receive the Kabbalion as a welcome gift. You'll find it through the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code on your screen. I'll give you a moment to do that. I'm a researcher and a host, not a mystic. I want to be careful with this language, but I also don't think it serves anyone to translate a genuine phenomenological account into safer, more palatable vocabulary just to avoid sounding unusual. I personally think this is the most underrated dimension of any serious practice, the willingness to report what's actually occurring rather than what you expected to occur or what you think you're supposed to be experiencing. That gap between expectation and actuality is where the real information lives. On day 11, the water returned. Not in a dream this time, in that suspended moment of the second breath. A brief, unbidden image, that same dark surface, that same sense of depth below. It lasted less than a second. I let it pass. But it had come from somewhere, and I noted it felt less random than a stray thought. It felt, for lack of a better word, returned, like correspondence, like something had received my previous night's observation and was now acknowledging it. I wrote, "Second night of water." Different context, same quality of attention coming from below. I didn't know what to do with that yet, but I kept going. Here's where I want to slow down and ground this in something more concrete, because I think the practice only makes sense if you understand who or what Thoth actually is in the Hermetic tradition. Not the Wikipedia version, not the surface-level association with writing and wisdom that gets recirculated constantly. The deeper structural role Thoth occupies in the cosmological architecture of the Hermetic texts. Thoth in the Egyptian tradition predates his Greek absorption. He's not simply Hermes with a different name, though the Greeks made that equation and the Hermetic tradition inherited it. In the original Egyptian framework, Thoth is the mediator of divine speech. He's the one who writes what Ra decrees, who records the weighing of the heart, who carries the words between worlds. That's his function. Not the creator, not the destroyer. The one who ensures that what is spoken at the level of divine intention becomes legible, transmissible at every level below it. The Hermetic corpus inherits this and elevates it. In the Poimandres, the first and most fundamental text of the Corpus Hermeticum, the divine creative act is one of breath and speech together. The nous, the divine mind, breathes a creative word into the primordial darkness, and from that breath word, the structure of reality begins to differentiate. Thoth, as the figure who stands at the intersection of breath and logos, is therefore not just the scribe. He is the principle of intelligible transmission between planes. He is what makes the upper world legible to the lower. This matters for the breathing practice because, in the Hermetic framework, breath is not merely physiological. It is the vehicle of pneuma, a concept the tradition takes with absolute seriousness, one that later gets absorbed into Stoic philosophy and eventually into early Christian theology, but which, in the Hermetic context, refers specifically to the animating spirit that moves between the cosmic planes. Breath, in this understanding, is the medium through which the material body maintains its connection to the divine order, which means breathing consciously, breathing with intention and with alignment to the threefold structure is not a relaxation technique. It's a tuning mechanism. It's the act of bringing the instrument back into resonance with the source frequency. I spent about 3 hours before this series going through a particular translation of the Hermetica, Clement Salomon's version, which I find more readable than some of the older academic renderings without sacrificing rigor. And what struck me most in that reading was how consistently the texts treat breath as the first medium of divine knowledge. Before initiation through symbolic sight, before initiation through sound or name or ritual, breath. The practitioner is always first asked to breathe, to receive, to align the body to the pneumatic current before anything else happens. Thoth's three-breath sequence fits inside that tradition precisely because it mirrors the threefold cosmic structure. The material breath grounds the practitioner in the body, makes the body a conscious participant rather than a passive container. The suspended breath activates what the Hermetic texts call the intermediary or subtle body, the vehicle that moves between sleep and waking, between ordinary cognition and expanded perception. And the exhale as offering, this is the one that consistently gets underexplained, is an act of conscious participation in the divine circulation. You received pneuma from the source. You return it enriched. You are not just a receiver, you are a node in the circuit. That framing changed how I performed the third breath around day 12 or 13. I had been exhaling with a kind of passive relief, the way you exhale after holding tension. I shifted to exhaling with active intention, offering, not letting go of, giving back. The difference is subtle physically. The difference in what it produced was not subtle at all. One of the viewers from my last video, the one on Hermetic number symbolism where we went deep on the Ogdoad, left a comment that I kept thinking about during this practice. They wrote, "The reason these systems feel hollow to modern practitioners is because we're taught to observe them, not inhabit them." I think that's exactly right, and it's what the shift from passive to active exhale unlocked. I had been observing the practice. Around day 12, I started inhabiting it. The water image came again that night. This time, it stayed longer. And this time, in that suspended second breath moment, I had the distinct and unexplainable impression of being observed in return. I want to be precise about what I mean by the title of this video, because I know that phrase, "something started answering," is the kind of claim that can get interpreted two very different ways, and I don't want either misreading to stick. The first misreading would be, Daniel is saying he made contact with the literal deity Thoth, the ancient Egyptian god, who spoke to him during breathwork. That's not what I'm saying. I don't have a framework in which that claim makes clean sense to me, and I'm not going to adopt one retroactively to make the experience sound more dramatic than it needs to be. The second misreading would be, Daniel is using answering as soft metaphor for feeling relaxed, or having insights, or experiencing the kind of mild altered state that any consistent breathwork practice can produce through straightforward physiological mechanisms. That's also not what I'm saying, and that reductive interpretation doesn't actually account for what happened in the final week. What I mean is something more precise than either of those options. Something in the practice began to feel responsive, directional, as though there was a quality of attention on the other side of the breath, not personified in the way a human presence is personified, but not absent either. The closest analogy I have is this. You know how a space changes when someone walks into a room? The air doesn't change, the temperature doesn't measurably shift, but the quality of the environment changes in a way that any human being can sense. What started happening around day 14 was something like that, but occurring in the interior space opened by the practice, not in the physical room around me. Day 14. The suspended breath lasted longer than usual. Not because I held it deliberately, it simply didn't want to release yet. In that extended suspension, the water image returned with a new quality. Not a surface with depth below. Something had surfaced. Not visible exactly, more like a presence that had moved from the deeper register to the threshold. I exhaled. The room felt different afterward. Day 15. I made a mistake I hadn't made since the first week. I tried to direct the practice. I went in with an agenda, a specific question I wanted answered. The third breath produced nothing. The interior space, which had been opening reliably, stayed closed. I noted this. Agenda kills the circuit. Day 16. I went in empty, no question. The presence was back and closer. By day 18, I had stopped trying to characterize what was occurring and simply started tracking it. The notes from that period are more sparse than the earlier entries, not because less was happening, but because language felt increasingly inadequate to the actual experience. What I can report with confidence, the quality of my sleep changed. Not just that I fell asleep faster, though I did, the sleep itself felt different, denser, more organized. I woke on day 19 with the clearest head I can remember having in a long time. Not energized exactly, settled. Like the cognitive static that I had assumed was just the background noise of adult life had been, at least partially, filtered out. Day 20. The practice produced something I can only call a communication, while being fully aware of how that word sounds. During the second breath, the suspension, there was an interior event that felt structurally different from thought. Thought moves horizontally, associatively, one idea pulling another into sequence. This moved vertically, down and then up. It didn't arrive as words, though afterward it organized into words. You have been practicing receiving. Now practice being received. I don't know what to do with that. I wrote it down verbatim. I've thought about it every day since. In the Hermetic tradition, there is a concept called the gnosis of the nous, the direct knowing of the divine mind, not through symbol or text or ritual, but through a kind of interior alignment so complete that the barrier between individual consciousness and cosmic intelligence becomes temporarily permeable. The texts are clear that this is not a common experience. They're equally clear that it is the goal of the entire system, that all the breathing, all the symbolic study, all the invocation of divine names is preparation for this permeability. You are not trying to summon something external. You are trying to remember that you were never fully separate from it. I'm not claiming I achieved gnosis in 20 days of bedtime breathwork. That would be an absurd claim, and I'm not making it. But I am saying that by day 20, the practice had produced something that felt qualitatively different from any meditative state I had accessed before, and that the Hermetic framework, the specific cosmological architecture encoded in the three-breath sequence, seemed to be doing something that a generic breathwork practice would not have done. The naming of Thoth was doing something. The threefold structure was doing something. The intention to align with a specific current, rather than simply to relax or clear the mind. That intention was doing something. Day 21, the last night. I did the practice and then stayed still for a long time after. The presence was there, not closer than it had been, not more dramatic, simply consistent. Like something that had always been there, but had been waiting for me to be quiet enough to notice it. I sat with that for what felt like a long time. Then I slept, deeply, and dreamed of the water again. And this time I wasn't standing at the surface looking down. I was in it, and the water was warm, and everything below me was lit from somewhere I couldn't locate. And it didn't feel like dreaming, it felt like arriving. 21 days later, I'm left with a question I didn't have when I started, which I think is the right outcome from any serious investigation. The question isn't whether the practice works. In measurable, reportable terms, it clearly produced something. The question is what kind of thing it produced, and whether the Hermetic framework that generated it is descriptive or merely generative. Whether it's pointing at something real, or whether it's a sophisticated technology for producing real experiences through symbolic engagement. And whether, at some level, that distinction even matters. The Hermetic tradition would say the question dissolves itself. The corpus hermeticum is not interested in the division between the real and the symbolically constructed, because in its cosmology, that division is itself a symptom of the fallen, contracted state of consciousness the practice is designed to heal. When you're operating at the level of nous, of genuine divine intelligence, the distinction between an authentic encounter with a cosmic principle and a profound interior movement toward it collapses. The encounter and the movement are the same event, approached from different angles. I find that intellectually coherent. I don't find it fully satisfying, which I think is appropriate. The territory is larger than any map I currently have for it. What I can say with confidence, standing on this side of the 21 days, the 3-breath sequence is not a relaxation technique. That's the first thing to understand. If you pick it up looking for a way to decompress before bed, you'll probably get some mild benefit and then put it down after a week, because it will feel like more work than it needs to be for that purpose. The structure, the naming, the intentional cosmological framing, those elements don't serve the goal of relaxation. They serve a different goal. They're tools for permeability, for thinning the membrane between ordinary waking consciousness and whatever is on the other side of it. The second thing I'd say is that the 21-day duration matters more than I initially expected. I went in understanding it as a traditional Hermetic number, 3 sevens, a completion of cycles, but I understood it intellectually. I didn't understand it experientially until around day 14 or 15, when I started seeing why the earlier days were necessary. Days 1 through 7 are calibration. Days 8 through 14 are deepening. Days 15 through 21 are something else, some kind of stabilization of whatever opened, so that it doesn't simply close again the moment the formal practice ends. I can feel that. The interior space that the practice produced doesn't fully collapse when I'm not actively breathing into it. Something of it persists. Something has been rearranged. The third thing, and this is where I want to be careful because it's the piece that's easiest to distort in either direction, is the Thoth element specifically. Using the name, holding the name internally as an orientation point. I said earlier I approach this as a functional metaphor, not a literal invocation. I'm still not prepared to call it literal invocation in the way a committed practitioner of ceremonial magic would understand that term. But I am prepared to say that the name was not inert, that holding Thoth as an interior reference point produced something that holding a generic intention toward wisdom or clarity did not produce, at least in my experience. There was a specificity to the current, a character to the response. Whether that character belongs to an actual cosmic intelligence or to the accumulated weight of thousands of years of human attention directed at this particular principle, or to some part of my own deep mind that the practice was activating and externalizing, I genuinely don't know. And I think sitting with that not knowing is the correct posture for now. Hermetic philosophy has always been, at its core, a philosophy of correspondence and resonance. As above, so below. As within, so without. The macrocosm legible in the microcosm. What this practice seems to do, at its best, is activate that correspondence in lived experience, rather than leaving it as a theoretical proposition. You stop reading about the resonance between the human and the divine. You start feeling it move through your breath. And once you've felt that, even briefly, even uncertainly, the study changes. The texts open differently. What seemed like poetic abstraction starts looking like precise, technical description. I'll be continuing the practice beyond the 21 days, not as a formal experiment with documented tracking, but as an ongoing part of how I work. I suspect it will keep teaching me things, and I suspect those things will keep showing up in how I approach everything we explore here. The questions this series raised are going to take more than a single video to work through. There are threads here about the Hermetic theory of sleep, about the specific role of the hypnagogic threshold in esoteric practice, about the relationship between pneuma and the subtle body in Neoplatonic and Hermetic synthesis. All of that is material I want to get into. So if you haven't subscribed yet, that's the reason to do it now. Not for this video, for what this video opened. The water is still there. I can feel it when I go still enough. Something below the surface, attentive, patient, lit from a source I haven't located yet. I'm not in a hurry to name it prematurely. Thoth, the Hermetica reminds us, does not reveal everything at once. He reveals what the student is prepared to receive. And then he waits, with the particular patience of something that exists outside of time, for the student to prepare a little more.